Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Gravitas, co-presented by Skoda Superb, Best in Next Class. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist.
Tibet is the highest region on the earth, home to one of the most persecuted people in the world, at the center of a decades-old geopolitical dispute, an old thorn in China's side, and now the latest flashpoint between America and China. US President Donald Trump has signed a new law that supports the rights of the Tibetan people. The provisions of the law are strong, clear, and unprecedented. China has promptly rejected it, but the law won't go away just because Beijing has rejected it. It comes with specific provisions and an important precedent for others to follow. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you all about this new American law, why it bothers China so much, what it means for Tibet and the Dalai Lama, and where it leaves India. Where is India in all of this? What is India's role in the new Tibet game? Has Delhi commented on Washington's moves? We'll discuss all of that. Also on the show, tracking the Wuhan virus mutations. New strains reported in South Africa and Nigeria. The UK strain also found in Sweden and Spain. How are these countries dealing with the infections? We'll tell you all about it. The Nashville car blast in America on Christmas Day was the work of a domestic suicide bomber. What was the motive? Another case, by the way, is under investigation. Will Nepal's government survive the latest churn? China has sent a top Communist Party official to fish in the troubled waters of Kathmandu. And another citizen journalist who reported on the Wuhan virus outbreak is put behind bars in China. The United Nations has now called for an immediate release. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
The U.S. Embassy in China has called for the release of 12 Hong Kongers on trial in Shenzhen, saying that the only crime of these Hong Kongers was to flee tyranny. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman, meanwhile, told a news briefing that America's remarks disregard fact. Charges against the Hong Kongers include illegal border crossing after a boat they were traveling in was intercepted en route to Taiwan. A Saudi court has sentenced prominent women's rights activist Lujan Al-Hathlul to 5 years and 8 months in prison in a trial that has drawn international condemnation. Lujan has been held since 2018. She was arrested along with at least a dozen other women's rights activists. Monks and civil groups staged a protest urging the Sri Lankan government to not bury the coronavirus victims. They say that the cremation of COVID victims was legalized as per the provisions of Health Ministry and approved by the country's top court. This comes after an interreligious community urged President Rajapaksa to allow the burial of Muslims and Christians who died due to COVID-19. A new report serves as yet another reminder of the impact of climate change. The Action Aid International and Climate Action Network South Asia says India and Bangladesh face a climate catastrophe by 2050. Nearly 63 million people in India and Bangladesh could be forced to migrate by 2050, as rising water levels could swallow coastal regions in South Asia. After lengthy delay, U.S. President Donald Trump has signed the $2.3 trillion coronavirus relief and government funding bill into law. This comes as huge relief for millions of Americans who were facing the loss of unemployment benefits. Massive clashes broke out between Syrian refugees and locals in North Lebanon, forcing hundreds of Syrian refugees to flee their makeshift camp after it was set on fire. In recent years, Lebanon has seen a rise in tensions between refugees and locals who blame the refugees for taking their jobs amid the growing financial crisis. In an attempt to tackle obesity, Britain will ban buy one get one free promotions for food high in fat, sugar or salt, along with free refills for sugary soft drinks in restaurants from April 2022. Obesity is one of Britain's biggest public health concerns, with almost 2/3 of adults in England overweight. Hurricane-force winds and floods struck parts of the UK and France as Storm Bella brought heavy rainfall. Thousands were left without electricity and planes were delayed or forced to reroute as the storm hit the region. India's Virat Kohli has staved off competition from some of cricket's modern-day greats to be named the ICC Male Player of the Decade. Kohli had over 20,300 international runs in the awards period of January 1st, 2011 to October 7th, 2020. He also raked up 64 hundreds and 94 50s and averaged nearly 57 across formats, comfortably higher than any of the other nominees. Australian all-rounder Elise Perry swept all the women's awards, including the Cricketer of the Decade. 20-time Grand Slam champion Roger Federer has withdrawn from the Australian Open in February. This is the first time that he is missing the tournament in 22 years. Federer has not played since the 2020 edition of the tournament after undergoing 2 surgeries on his right knee. The 39-year-old is still getting back to full fitness at his winter training base in Dubai.
Donald Trump has less than 1 month left in office, but you cannot accuse him of being a lame duck president. In fact, he's been quite the opposite of late, very busy, even around Christmas. After much back and forth, the President of the United States signed a $2.3 trillion bill to fund the U.S. government. This bill also had something for China, something that China would not like. Donald Trump has signed a bill into law, a bill that backs the Free Tibet movement. It says Washington should build an international coalition for the rights of Tibetans. The bill also calls for a U.S. consulate in Tibet. This law spells out America's new policy on Tibet, a policy that steps on China's toes. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you what America plans to do, why China does not like any of it, and where India stands in the new Tibet game. So first things first, what is the new American law? It is called the Tibetan Policy and Support Act of 2020. Let me tell you what it says. Point number 1, it makes 5 broad points. Let's start with point number 1. It talks about the next Dalai Lama. Who will it be? Who will choose him or her? The United States says Tibetans have the right to pick the next Dalai Lama, not the Chinese state. Beijing cannot dictate its choice. So according to this new law, if China announces the next Dalai Lama, America will not recognize him or her. This will not go down well with China. It hasn't, in fact. Let's come to point number 2, the rights of Tibetans. America wants to build an international coalition, a coalition that will recognize and safeguard the interests of Tibetans. Again, the perfect way to needle China. Point number 3, sanctions. This bill says that America will sanction Chinese officials if they try to appoint the next Dalai Lama, which includes economic and visa sanctions. Point number 4, a U.S. consulate in Tibet, something that gives America strategic access to this region. The new law says America will build a consulate in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. What if China does not agree to all of this? The bill has an answer. China will not be allowed to open any new consulates in the United States until America is allowed to have a consulate in Tibet. Point number 5, the role of civil society. The US bill wants to empower NGOs. It will assist organizations that support Tibetan communities in Tibet. By the way, do you know, China too has NGOs. They're called GONGOs, G-O-N-G-O. That's government-organized, non-governmental organization. Talk about oxymorons. Anyway, coming back to the US bill, what Donald Trump has signed is a set of unprecedented measures, and they are enforceable by law in America. What happens when Donald Trump leaves office? No change, hopefully. There is bipartisan support for action against China. This bill was passed unanimously by the US Senate last week. What about China? How does it view America's new law? Not favorably, of course. The wolf warrior in chief is the face of Chinese response.
China noticed the relevant bills signed by the US, bills related to Tibet, and firmly opposes them. The Tibet issue concerns China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. It purely belongs to China's internal affairs and does not allow any external forces to interfere. The Chinese government is unwavering in its determination to safeguard its national sovereignty and national security and to develop in its own interests.
So note his words. Sovereignty and territorial integrity, he says. External forces interfering in internal affairs. Coming from China, this is a bit rich. Even as these words were spoken, China continued to challenge India's territorial sovereignty and integrity in Ladakh. That standoff is very much on. Even as the statement came from Beijing, China continued to interfere in the domestic politics of Nepal. They've sent a senior official to Kathmandu to interfere. China's transgressions are serious and many. And every time it is questioned, its defense is one, the one China policy, Beijing's favorite go-to argument. So here's some breaking news for China. America has dumped that one China policy. And it may be just a matter of time before others follow suit. As of today, this is just an American law. It applies to America. It cannot be legally enforced on any other country, and yet it's a powerful message to China. It says three things basically. One, that there is bipartisan consensus in Washington for Tibet and against China. Two, American lawmakers are ready to provide legal backing for decisions against China. They have done here. And three, now this is a law, it must be enforced. So whatever Joe Biden's stand on China be, he'll have to follow this law. He called the Indo-Pacific Asia-Pacific. That's what he's done. But he cannot change the stand on Tibet without changing this law. And this new American law comes at just the right time because China has stepped up its campaign of oppression in Tibet. It has diluted the cultural and religious identity of Tibetans, forced them into submission. The key to doing this would be to control the Dalai Lama, and China is hard at work here. It wants to decide who the next Dalai Lama will be. It wants to control the succession plan. To understand why, we must understand the history and the institution of the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama, you see, is the spiritual head of Tibet. Until 9 years ago, he was also the political head of Tibet. The institution of the Dalai Lama goes back to the 1400s. This is 6 centuries ago. That's when it started. It stands on the pillar of reincarnation. So Tibetans believe that the Dalai Lama has control over his rebirth. He can choose the body into which he is reincarnated. The previous Dalai Lama died in 1933. It took 4 years to find his successor. The 14th Dalai Lama, the current one. Now he's 85 years old. He is ailing. It is the job of the high lamas of Buddhism to find his successor. But China wants to do that job. China wants to control that process to nominate the next Dalai Lama. It wants to appoint a pliant Dalai Lama. Now the Americans have said the Buddhist people of Tibet should be able to decide who the next Dalai Lama should be. So that's one part of the conflict. Who decides who will be the Dalai Lama? The second part of it is history. It starts in 1950. That's when China annexed Tibet. For the last 70 years, Beijing has been trying to impose itself on Tibet. It has hammered the land's unique identity, interfered with Tibetan Buddhism, attacked monasteries, pushed propaganda, and sent Han Chinese into the region. But controlling Tibet is not easy for China. Legitimizing its claim on Tibet, even less. They have no moral authority. The Dalai Lama and the Tibetan government have been in exile for years now. They are in India. When China took control of Tibet, the Dalai Lama fled to India with some 1,000 followers. This was in the year 1959. The Dalai Lama crossed the Himalayas on foot. Today, Dharamshala houses the Tibetan government in exile. It is located in the Indian state of Himachal Pradesh. Dharamshala is also the Dalai Lama's home. China does not recognize his authority. What does the Dalai Lama say? Well, not very much. He's not formally discussed reincarnation. All that he said is that the next Dalai Lama may be born in a free country and may be a female. Traditionally, the Dalai Lama picks his own successor. He tells his aides before his death where to look for a child who will be his reincarnation. The Dalai Lama's official website reads, and I'm quoting, "The person who reincarnates has sole legitimate authority over where and how he or she takes birth." But this time, the succession may not be so simple. For all you know, the world may end up with two Dalai Lamas, one picked by China, another by Dharamshala. China views the Dalai Lama as a separatist, someone who has been working to split Tibet from China. For Beijing, Tibet is a war trophy. It has poured in billions of dollars into this region, shattered the traditional Tibetan monastic order with the weight of Chinese factories. China's hold on Tibet can only be tightened if it gets to pick the next Dalai Lama, one who would be Tibetan by blood but Chinese by spirit. A Dalai Lama whose loyalties would lie with Beijing, who would comply with Chinese laws and regulations. Let me read out a tweet from Chinese spokesperson Zhao Lijian. This is what he said in 2019. "Reincarnation of living Buddhas, including the Dalai Lama, must comply with Chinese laws and regulations, follow religious rituals and historical conventions." Beijing has called Buddhism an ancient Chinese religion. Tibetans have been jailed for hanging photos of the Dalai Lama on their walls. In 1995, China detained a 6-year-old Tibetan boy who was recognized as the reincarnation of the Panchen Lama. The boy has not been seen since. Beijing went on to name his replacement, and now it wants to do the very same with the Dalai Lama. The spiritual leader is well aware of all these plans. This is what the Dalai Lama said in 2011, and I'm quoting again. "One thing I want to make clear, as far as my own rebirth is concerned, the final authority is myself, no one else, and obviously not Chinese communists." Then in 2019, the Dalai Lama told Reuters, the news agency, and I'm quoting again, "In future, in case you see two Dalai Lamas come, one from a free country and one chosen by the Chinese, then nobody will trust, nobody will respect the one chosen by China. So that's an additional problem for the Chinese." He's made it amply clear. 1 year on, China's problems are only piling up. The American legislation definitely comes in the way of Beijing's plans. What about India? India, after all, is home to the Dalai Lama. What is India's Tibet card? Where does it stand in this new game? Officially, India still recognizes the One China policy. Delhi has not commented on America's new bill. But Delhi's position tends to reflect itself in more subtle ways. It is not given to such statements, like Indian leaders wishing the Dalai Lama on his birthday, or India using special forces made up of Tibetan exiles to occupy strategic heights in Ladakh. What better way to rub it in China's face? The weeks and months ahead, though, will be crucial. Will India play its Tibet card more openly? Will other countries call out China in Tibet and stand up for the rights of 6 million Buddhists still living in Tibet? China had hoped to silence the world by nominating the next Dalai Lama. It may not be so easy now. Let's look at what is happening in the US. A 63-year-old man has been identified as a prime suspect of the Nashville Blast, the one that took place on Christmas Day. The man quit his job before the explosion, gifted his car to his ex-girlfriend, gave his house to another woman for free. And what he then orchestrated was straight out of a crime thriller. Here's a report.
The RV started making an announcement somewhere along the lines, don't quote me exactly, but there's a large bomb within this vehicle.
The Nashville Blast was straight out of a crime thriller.
Then the music stopped, and as I'm walking back toward Topping now, I just see orange, and then I hear a loud boom, and as I'm stumbling, because it rocked me that hard. I started stumbling.
And that kind of just like put my heart up in my throat.
And
Officers fought back tears as they tried to explain the moments leading up to the explosion. It was Christmas morning at America's country music capital. There was a crackle of gunfire just before dawn. A recreational vehicle was parked in downtown Nashville. A computer-generated voice from the RV started reciting a minute-by-minute countdown to an impending blast. The speaker played Downtown by Petula Clark. When the music stopped, there was thunder. The blast was caught on a surveillance camera of a city hostel. 3 people were injured, at least 40 businesses damaged. The explosion also affected mobile, internet and TV services across Tennessee and 4 other states. Authorities say 63-year-old Anthony Warner had planned it all. He was killed in the blast.
Base this conclusion on forensic evidence, including DNA evidence that you'll hear about, as well as evidence that was gathered at the scene of the bombing.
Reports say Warner was a long-time Nashvilleian. He held several IT jobs throughout his life and resigned from one just this month. Warner gave his car to his ex-girlfriend and told her he had cancer. The 63-year-old also signed away his home and only kept his motorhome. Warner was inside the RV when it exploded. Reports say the man had extensive experience with electronics and alarm systems. The question is, what was his motive?
I know that there have been associates of Warner that have been questioned about a 5G paranoia that he may have had. What can you tell us about that?
So right now we're looking at any and all possible motives. We're not at a position where we can speculate on that now. We are interviewing individuals that we've identified that are known to the suspect.
FBI agents have investigated over 500 tips. Warner's home too has been searched. The plot took a twist 2 days after the blast when a box truck parked in Wilson County, Tennessee started playing an audio similar to what was heard in Nashville. The truck's location was barely 30 miles from the blast site. The case is being investigated. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Panic is setting in around the world. Tourists are fleeing their holiday resorts. Lockdowns are making a comeback. There is chaos and confusion at airports. All this thanks to 3 mutations of the Wuhan virus. 1 in the UK and 2 in Africa. Is this fear warranted? Or is this an overcorrection rather, for the mistakes made during the first wave?
Nestled away in the Swiss Alps, this is one of Europe's top skiing resorts. Verbier. It's an absolute struggle to get rooms here, which is why the events of this weekend came as a surprise. On Saturday, the British guests staying here pulled a stunt. They fled. Most of them didn't even bother checking out. Some rooms still had untouched service trays at the door. But what were they fleeing from? Forced quarantine, all thanks to the mutant Wuhan virus. Switzerland ordered a 10-day quarantine for British travellers who arrived after December 14th. Overnight, the tourists made a dash for the border. There was a similar rush at the Japanese borders as well. Hundreds of travellers returned, fearing strict border curbs. Until there is more clarity on the mutant strains, these restrictions are here to stay. 3 dangerous mutations have emerged so far. 1 each in the United Kingdom, South Africa and Nigeria. The UK strain has crossed the Atlantic. Cases were reported in Canada's southern Ontario. Worryingly, the patients have no known travel history or high-risk contact. In Europe, both Sweden and Spain reported mutant infections. All of them were travellers from Britain. Scientists have identified 14 defining mutations in the UK variant, including 7 in the virus's spike protein. This is why the mutant strain is more infectious than the original, almost 70% more. As for severity, there is still no evidence. The mutant and the original appear to be equally potent. South Africa's mutant is spreading like wildfire. Between 80 to 90% of new patients here are carrying it. Much like the UK strain, this one too has a mutated spike protein. So does this mean the two are related? The World Health Organization says no. The two variants originated separately. So did the third strain, which was reported in Nigeria. It is still too early to say whether Nigeria's variant is more infectious or potent. Experts say there is no cause for alarm. The Wuhan virus has undergone multiple mutations, almost 2 every month. Most of these changes are benign. They do not affect the severity of the virus. But governments are being cautious. They have fallen back to the first line of defense: lockdowns and social distancing. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Turkey has taken one more step towards autocracy. In the name of fighting terrorism, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is crushing dissent. He has brought in a new law that enables his government to control the civil society in Turkey. The law seems to be inspired by the Chinese Communist Party. It gives the government of Turkey more control over civil society groups, NGOs. It was approved by the Turkish parliament on Sunday. It allows the Interior Ministry of Turkey to appoint officials at NGOs. The ministry can halt a group's activities and order random inspections. It can also control and limit their fundraising activities. The Turkish Interior Minister now has unprecedented powers. He can shut down a group whenever he wants, without giving it a chance to appeal. How does Turkey justify all of this while calling itself a democracy? How does Turkey justify all of this? By saying that this law will help the government fight terrorism. Why now? Why does Turkey need this particular law right now? Because it is under pressure. The Financial Action Task Force, the FATF, the global terror funding watchdog, released a report last year. It had a specific warning for Turkey. It said that there were, and I'm quoting from this report, serious shortcomings in Turkey's approach towards combating money laundering and terror financing. The FATF listed 40 action points, 40. Turkey had 2 options: control terror funding or be grey-listed, just like its friend Pakistan. So President Erdogan targeted 2 birds with 1 stone. He brought in a law ostensibly to curb terror, but actually to curb the civil society. This new law has 43 articles. It changes 7 Turkish laws. Now, we're not sure if that's good enough for the FATF, but it's certainly very good news for Erdogan because he's been able to tighten his grip on his country. The Turkish government now has powers to appoint trustees to NGOs, suspend their activities, kill their assets, control their funds. Essentially, President Erdogan can now abolish human rights groups in Turkey. He has done this in the past, by the way. Used terrorism as an excuse to crush opposition. It began after the attempted coup of 2016. More than 500,000 people had to face legal proceedings in Turkey. Thousands of journalists, lawyers and opposition politicians were put behind bars, again on charges of terrorism. That crackdown destroyed civil society. Hundreds of NGOs had to shut down by an executive decree. The purge included NGOs that were delivering vital supplies to Syrians across the border, those who were internally displaced by the war, as well as more than 3 million Syrian refugees hosted by Turkey. These aid workers were involved in a humanitarian cause. They were all targeted by the Turkish state. Erdogan went after them. The aid workers were targeted with intimidation tactics, red tape, deportation. American aid agencies in particular were Turkey's target. Groups like the Mercy Corps and International Medical Corps were expelled from Turkey. By the end of 2016, around 375 NGOs had to shut down. Now the president seems to be going after what's left. Reports say nearly 680 civil society groups have now signed a declaration. They say the law violates the Turkish constitution, but considering the past, it's unlikely that Erdogan will budge. Only international pressure can help these NGOs now and possibly put Turkey back on the path to democracy. And talking democracy, we have Nepal. It's been through a period of political turmoil. The ruling party has split into two factions. The president has signed on fresh elections in April next year, 2021. This is a stern test for Nepal's democracy. But instead of letting Nepal figure out its own path, some countries that don't quite understand democracy are intent on creating trouble. China has dispatched a 4-member team to Kathmandu, and they have one goal: to keep the Nepal Communist Party intact and in power. Our next report tells you why Beijing is wading into Nepal's power struggle.
Cold War buffs will tell you that red states stick close together. Communist regimes have always been in the business of propping up their brethren elsewhere, often at the expense of democracy. Here's a 21st century reprise set in the Himalayas. There's a power struggle underway in Nepal. The Communist Party has split down the middle. But China is playing spoilsport. On Sunday, a 4-member team arrived in Nepal from Beijing. Their mission: to keep the Nepal Communist Party intact. Leading the delegation is this man, Gu Yeju, Vice Minister of the CCP's International Department. For Gu, Nepal is familiar territory. Back in 2018, he led a similar team to Kathmandu. The objective was to unite Nepal's two warring communist factions: Oli's Marxist-Leninist group and Dahal's Maoist Center. That trip was a successful one. In May 2018, both factions joined hands. The Nepal Communist Party was formed. 2 years later, Gu is employing the same strategy. He is strutting the corridors of power in Kathmandu with seemingly limitless access. On Sunday, the team met President Bidya Devi Bhandari and Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli. The PM's team called it a courtesy call, but it was actually a bargain. One that Oli rejected. The Chinese delegation wanted Oli to reverse his decision to dissolve the parliament. In return, Beijing would keep the rival faction at bay. Oli remains prime minister and the party remains intact. Unfortunately for the Chinese, Oli reportedly declined. On Monday, Gu and his team met the rival faction. They pressed Pushpa Kamal Dahal to reunite the two sides. China is wary of the upcoming elections. The communist vote will be split between the two factions. Other parties could capitalize. Parties that may not pursue a pro-China policy. But the NCP is a known quantity. During their days of insurgency, China was among the biggest supporters. So today, it considers the NCP to be a natural ally, bound by the thought of communism. The people of Nepal do not reciprocate this feeling. They detest Chinese high-handedness. Geopolitically, Nepal is a crucial ally for China. A favorable government in Kathmandu would give Beijing the upper hand against India. A communist split threatens this objective, so Beijing dispatched its top man to play power broker. But it's a dangerous game, one that threatens to derail Nepal's hard-fought stability. This is a country whose rulers were massacred in their own palace. A country that was traumatized by 10 years of civil war and insurgency. And now, when peace has finally been achieved, China's quest for influence is threatening to derail it. A bad neighbor is indeed a great misfortune. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
India is setting the ground for the post-pandemic world. It is slowly but surely stepping into a leadership role. There are unprecedented visits, cementing of ties, outreach programs, formation of strategic alliances, and tapping into opportunities. Let me begin with a recap. In October this year, India's Army Chief, General M.M. Naravne, was in Myanmar. The next month, he was in Nepal. Between the 2nd and the 3rd week of December, General Naravne visited Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The Army Chief's visit to Saudi Arabia was unprecedented. It came on the heels of Riyadh's deteriorating ties with Islamabad. Pakistan's Army Chief, General Bajwa, was not allowed to meet the Saudi Crown Prince in August. And here you had the Indian Army Chief meeting top Saudi generals. General Naravne's visit also came on the heels of India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar's visit to the UAE and Bahrain. As we speak, India's External Affairs Minister is in Qatar. It's a 2-day visit. Dr. S. Jaishankar attended an India-Qatar business roundtable, interacted with the Indian community there. He is also expected to meet the Qatari Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman bin Jassim Al Thani. At least 700,000 Indians live in Qatar. Many Indian workers have benefited from Qatar's recent labour reforms, which includes a 25% hike in the minimum wage and dilution of a clause that required workers to take the employer's consent before switching jobs. In 2019, the bilateral trade between Qatar and India was worth almost $11 billion. The Qatar Investment Authority has invested $600 million in 2 Indian firms. Jaishankar's visit is expected to focus on trade and energy cooperation. But let's just zoom out for a moment, and you will see that the visit goes way beyond all of this. It has a lot to do with West Asia's shifting sands and an emerging post-pandemic world, one that is built on strategic alliances. India views West Asia as its extended neighborhood. West Asia is putting an end to historical and regional disputes. In the last 5 months, 4 Arab countries have formalized ties with Israel, the United Arab Emirates, UAE, the Sudan, Morocco and Bahrain. The Gulf Cooperation Council countries, or the GCC countries, recently held talks on ending a rift with Qatar. It is talking about lifting air, land and water blockades of Qatar. Why do you think all of this is happening at this time? Because this region now has a common enemy, Iran. It just so happens that Iran is getting closer to China. Now here's a question. Which country does India have a standoff with in Ladakh? China, of course. Do you get the point? Do you see something in common here? India's ties with West Asia are no longer anchored on just oil, diaspora and remittances. The relationship is now strategic. There are common foes. West Asia is distancing itself from Pakistan. It is coming together against Iran. And both Iran and Pakistan are close to China, a country that India has a border dispute with. The virtual GCC discussion was held this morning at a time when India's Foreign Affairs Minister is in Qatar. Look at the timing of the visit. As we speak, there is another very significant visit that is underway. India's Army Chief is on a 3-day visit to South Korea. Now, Seoul has been one of India's major weapon suppliers. It also happens to be a country that is witnessing growing rift with China. Let's talk about the Army Chief's visit first. General Naravne's agenda is clear: bolstering military cooperation. He will be calling on the Korean Defense Minister, the Army Chief, the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Korea's Minister of Defense, Acquisition, Planning and Administration, basically the who's who of South Korea's defense sector. Now consider this. South Korea is fighting Chinese aggression in the East China Sea. It is pushing for maritime rules-based order. There is also an online war. South Korean band BTS faced a backlash from Chinese state media. So do you see the common foe here as well? A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the post-pandemic world order, and I told you how the task before India was to aim for greater global outreach, develop stronger relations with like-minded countries, and leverage the partnership model. Well, what we see today is New Delhi doing just that. Now we'll talk about a Chinese journalist. Her name is Zhang Zhan. For the world, Zhang is a journalist who brought out the truth of Wuhan, the cover-up, the mishaps, the chaos that ensued on the ground after the outbreak. But in the eyes of China, she is a criminal. Today, she was put behind bars for 4 years. What was her crime? She did her job. She reported the truth about Wuhan. The United Nations has now called for her release, but China is going after every independent journalist who challenged the state's narrative. This report has her story.
It is rare for a journalist to get so much attention in China, especially when they are on trial. But China wants to make an example out of this one. Her name is Zhang Jian, and this is her lawyer, the man being taken in by the police officer in plain clothes. What did Zhang Jian do to deserve such attention? Her job. She was reporting. As an independent journalist, she reported from Wuhan at the height of the virus outbreak. This is her reward for the hard work. 4 years in jail. Zhang is a former lawyer. In February this year, she travelled from Shanghai to Wuhan. That's where she remained for 3 months, documenting everything. From overflowing hospitals to empty shops. And the daily life under lockdown. Zhang's reportage showed the truth about Wuhan. The chaos that ensued after the outbreak. And the botched up response of the local authorities. Now Zhang is paying a heavy price for exposing the Chinese state. She is in custody. Her lawyer said she is on a hunger strike.
What I'm most worried about is that she's such a determined person. She still thinks she's innocent, and we both pleaded her innocence in court, and the court gave such a harsh sentence. She's probably more determined to continue her hunger strike until the very end. So I'm very worried about her health and her life.
Zhang's lawyer visited her earlier this month. Reports say she had a feeding tube attached to her nose and mouth. Zhang's hands were tied to prevent her from removing the tube. This treatment in detention has made Zhang frail. Reports say she attended the hearing on Monday in a wheelchair. Despite the oppression, Zhang Jian continues to fight the Chinese state. She refused to plead guilty during the proceedings. Finally, the court pronounced her guilty of picking quarrels and provoking trouble. A frivolous charge often used by the Chinese government to target dissidents and human rights activists. Zhang is the first citizen journalist to be formally sentenced for critical reportage, but several others have been punished. In September, Chen Qishi was put under state supervision. He had live-streamed videos from Wuhan during the lockdown. Li Zehua and Fang Bin, 2 more independent journalists, were detained. There may be others whose story is yet to get out. These crackdowns prove what the world has long known. China is hiding the truth about Wuhan and will go to any lengths to do so. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
The flightless kiwi is New Zealand's national symbol. This bird is an endangered species, so every one of them is precious. Now, a rare white kiwi mancura has died in New Zealand, prompting an outpouring of grief across the nation. Here's the story of the country's beloved kiwi.
Manukura. It means chiefly status in indigenous Maori language. This was an apt name for this rare white kiwi. Her birth was a watershed moment for New Zealand. Hatched in captivity, she was the star of her pack. The North Island brown kiwi was born in 2011. She had a rare genetic trait called leucism, one that gave her this striking white plumage. Traditionally, a white kiwi is a symbol of new beginnings. And for the indigenous Maori tribe, her birth was a cause for celebration. Interestingly, for most of her first year, Manukura was identified as male. It was only discovered later that she was a female kiwi. This is just one of the many surprises that the bird had under her wings. She once made headlines for noisily beating up her prospective mate. Manukura has since inspired stuffed toys, memorabilia, and even a picture book. Manukura was an international celebrity in her own right. drawing more and more visitors to the Pukaha National Wildlife Centre.
The arrival of a white chick changed everything for us here. We suddenly had an international celebrity on our hands and everybody wanted to come and see him.
Disaster struck early this month when rangers noticed that she was losing weight. Vets found an unfertilized egg that Manukura was unable to lay. Though the operation was said to be successful, her health continued to deteriorate. She passed away on 27th of December. Her death was announced on the Wildlife Centre's Instagram page, saying that she will be sorely missed. Soon after, there was outpouring of grief on Twitter. From calling her a real bundle of energy to calling her death tragic on many levels, people remembered this little white kiwi, one that over the years became a symbol for New Zealand and its conservation efforts.
This encouragement feeding usually goes on for about 7 to 10 days.
Bureau Report, WION World is One.
2020, the year of the Wuhan virus pandemic, along with the virus also wreaking havoc, were extreme weather conditions triggered by climate change that caused damage worth billions. This report wraps it up.
Fires in Australia and United States. Floods in China, India, Japan and Pakistan. Storms in Europe and the Americas. Nearly every part of the world was hit by climate change-related disasters. To put a number on it, as per a report by Christian Aid, 2020 witnessed around 15 most destructive and devastating climate disasters. Yes, you heard that right. And that's not it. 9 of these 15 devastating natural calamities caused damages worth at the very least $5 billion. To understand this better, let's take a look at these chronologically. In January, Australia suffered bushfires that reportedly claimed 34 lives and caused damages worth $5 billion. In the period from January to June, East Africa was taken over by locust swarms, causing damage worth $8.5 billion. And from February to October was the period of the most devastating windstorms for Europe, and the damage caused was worth over $5.9 billion. In May, Cyclone Amphan's ravages caused damage worth $13 billion, and around the same time, from May till November, the Americas witnessed hurricanes, and that could mean losses up to $41 billion. And June to October brought with them floods in many parts of China and India, causing damages worth $32 billion and $10 billion, respectively. The floods in India were the 5th most expensive extreme weather event in the world. And Japan and Pakistan too were hit by heavy flooding in July. The damages were worth $8.5 and $1.5 billion, respectively. It is important to note here that financial costs in richer countries can be higher, as the properties were valued at a higher price. But damages in many poorer countries were equally devastating, even though the property may not have a high price tag. The warming world has brought in much trouble this year, as though the pandemic wasn't enough. Even though, due to lockdowns and movement restriction, emissions dipped this year. As per the UN Emissions Gap report, the world is heading towards a global temperature rise of 3 degrees Celsius. But these extreme weather events have not just caused property and financial damage. Scores of people have been displaced. Lives and livelihoods have been lost, and many are still reeling from the impact of these events in different parts of the world. And the recommendations across various reports remain the same. Cutting down greenhouse gases, better funding, and investing in renewable energy. However, inaction and low spending on more sustainable practices continue to remain a problem. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images.